Good morning. I'm Carl with the Hondo Public Library. The Mexican-American War, fought from 1846 to 1848, was a turning point in North American history. It shaped the borders of the modern United States and altered the destiny of Mexico. At the heart of this conflict was Texas, a land that had already been a battleground between the two nations for over a decade. Let's dive in. Texas had won its independence from Mexico in 1836 after a bitter revolution. As much as we romanticize our state's history as an independent country, it was a tough time for Texas financially. Some in Texas believed that a continued independence was not sustainable and sought annexation into the United States. Many in the U.S. supported this move. Mexico had never recognized Texas independence to begin with and warned that annexation would be considered an act of war. Undeterred, in 1845, the U.S. Congress approved the annexation of Texas, bringing it into the Union as the 28th state. Mexico was outraged. President Mariano Paredes declared that annexation was direct aggression against Mexico's sovereignty. Diplomatic relations between the two countries collapsed, and Mexican forces were sent to defend the disputed territory between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. In early 1846, President James K. Polk sent U.S. troops to the Rio Grande. General Zachary Taylor established a military outpost along the Rio Grande to assert American claims to the disputed territory. This small but strategic fort, initially called Fort Texas, was constructed directly across from the Mexican city of Matamoros. On April the 25th, a patrol of 70 U.S. soldiers led by Captain Seth Thornton was scouting the area when they encountered a force of about 2,000 Mexican troops under General Anastasio Torrejon. Heavily outnumbered, the Americans were quickly surrounded and forced to surrender after a brief skirmish. 11 U.S. soldiers were killed and the rest were taken prisoner. A few days later, General Mariano Arista, commander of the Mexican forces in the region, ordered an attack on the fort. Mexican artillery unleashed heavy bombardment, hoping to force a surrender. Major Jacob Brown and his 500 U.S. troops held their ground, enduring days of relentless shelling. Despite limited supplies and casualties mounting, the defenders refused to give in. Major Brown died during the fighting, and the fort was eventually renamed for him, which in turn gave its name to the city of Brownsville. An old cannon at UT Brownsville marks the spot where he received his fatal wound. When word of these incidents reached Washington, President Polk used it as evidence that Mexico had shed American blood on American soil. The claim was very controversial, as many, including future President Abraham Lincoln, questioned whether the battle had actually taken place on U.S. territory. Nevertheless, on May 13, 1846, Congress declared war on Mexico, officially launching the Mexican-American War. The Battle of Palo Alto was the first large battle of the war proper. The U.S. Army, under General Zachary Taylor, utilized what was called flying artillery, a highly mobile form of horse-drawn light artillery that allowed rapid repositioning on the battlefield. This tactic gave the Americans a significant advantage in firepower and maneuverability against the larger Mexican force, led by General Arista. The Mexican artillery, meanwhile, was hampered by a batch of weak gunpowder, which produced lower velocity cannon fire. In some cases, the rounds fired out slowly enough for American soldiers to easily dodge them. Despite numerical superiority, the Mexican army struggled to counter the U.S. artillery's speed and accuracy. After several hours of fighting, Mexican forces withdrew. The day after, the two armies clashed again at the Battle of Resaca de la Palma. As the retreating Mexican forces attempted to regroup in a dry riverbed, General Taylor launched an aggressive assault, sending U.S. infantry and dragoons into close combat. The battle quickly turned chaotic, with fierce hand-to-hand fighting as American troops overran Mexican positions. U.S. forces captured enemy artillery and used it against the retreating Mexicans, forcing a complete rout. General Arista's army fled across the Rio Grande, abandoning supplies and weapons. Many men drowned trying to swim to the other side. With this victory, the U.S. secured control of the disputed territory, lifting the siege of Fort Texas and solidifying their foothold in the region. With the Mexican army in full retreat, General Taylor seized the momentum and crossed the Rio Grande, launching his invasion of northern Mexico. His campaign began with the occupation of Matamoros, a key supply center abandoned by Mexican forces. From there, Taylor advanced south, capturing Monterrey after a brutal three-day battle in September. His victories in northern Mexico secured U.S. control of the region and paved the way for further offensives deeper into Mexican territory. Mexico's defeats exposed the weaknesses of its military and political leadership, leading to widespread dissatisfaction. In response, the Mexican government sought the return of General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, the former president and general who had been living in exile in Cuba. Believing he could rally the nation and turn the tide of the war, Mexican leaders allowed him to return in late 1846. The U.S. lifted the Gulf Coast naval blockade and allowed Santa Anna to return to Mexico. Santa Anna had secretly negotiated with U.S. officials, promising to seek peace while actually preparing to take command of the Mexican army. Santa Anna gloated over his ruse, claiming, "The United States was deceived in believing that I would ever be capable of betraying my mother country." Santa Anna's return to power reinvigorated Mexico's war effort. He swiftly assembled an army and marched north to confront General Taylor at the Battle of Buena Vista in February of 1847. With a force nearly 3 times the size of Taylor's, Santa Anna launched a series of fierce assaults, pushing the Americans to the brink of defeat. However, Taylor's troops, including volunteer regiments and artillery, held their ground. A well-timed counterattack forced Santa Anna to retreat. Santa Anna's greatest failure came with the U.S. advance on Mexico City. After losing key battles at Cerro Gordo, Contreras, and Churubusco, he attempted to defend the capital but struggled against the disciplined army of Winfield Scott. His forces suffered heavy casualties, allowing U.S. troops to enter Mexico City on September 14, 1847. Despite these defeats, Santa Anna refused to surrender. In late September of 1847, he made one last attempt to defeat the U.S. Army, launching an assault on Puebla in hopes of cutting off Scott's supply lines. However, the attack failed, and with dwindling support, Santa Anna fled the capital, marking the end of his role in the war. Without his command, the morale of the Mexican army faltered, leaving the country vulnerable to further defeat. The war ended in 1848 with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Mexico was forced to cede a vast amount of land to the United States, including California, Arizona, and New Mexico. Texas's borders were officially recognized at the Rio Grande, securing its place in the Union. However, tensions between former Mexican citizens and new American settlers remained, shaping Texas's complex identity for years to come. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next month for our next chapter of Monday Memories.